Hi, my name is Andrea Beidelman. I am a sideline beekeeper and a honey producer in the Mid-Atlantic region. I currently have beehives on 8 different properties, and those apiaries are specifically for organic crop pollination, everything from berries to apples to pumpkins, and we also produce honey from those hives. Colony collapse disorder is characterized by a sudden honeybee colony death with a lack of healthy adult worker bees left inside the hive. And the disorder appears to affect the worker bees' ability to navigate. So they leave the hive to forage for nectar and pollen in the field, never to return because they can't find their way back to the hive. So what you have left is the queen and some babies or brood and a few survivor bees in the hive, and which is unsustainable. They can't support themselves, and so the hive eventually dies. And so, although a specific cause is not known, the researchers are kind of zeroing in on a combination of factors, which include like chemical contamination or nicotine-based pesticides, parasites such as the Varroa destructor mite, pathogens, poor diversity in diet, where bees are feeding on monocrops, so just one specific crop, and they're not getting diversity in nutrition as needed. So, colony collapse disorder is of great concern to me and many beekeepers. It's unsustainable for our industry. The losses that we've seen over the past decade, for instance, last year, in 2016, losses as a nation were over 40%. And we can't meet the pollination needs of our crops for food supply with those kind of losses. And it's tough on the industry because we're having to buy new bees to replace those that have died, and we can't afford as an industry to keep doing that to support the pollination needs of our nation. So it is of great concern. So the ways in which our hives have been affected by colony collapse disorder are, that we have definitely suffered losses in line with the Mid-Atlantic region, which is in upwards of 60% loss last year, and which is higher than the national average. But so with these losses, obviously it takes an economic toll, and we're having to replace these bees in order to meet pollination contracts for various farmers. And so it's definitely a stressor on those of us in the beekeeping industry, including myself. Colony collapse disorder has a direct effect on my profession in that the economic viability of having to replace our honeybees year after year becomes a financial burden, and eventually we have no other choice but to go out of business. And we've seen that over the past decade with some of the major commercial beekeepers, and that they just can't afford to keep replacing. And so then they're not meeting pollination needs of crops throughout the nation. And this then becomes an issue for our food supply. Colony collapse disorder has a direct effect on my profession in that the economic viability of having to replace our honeybees year after year becomes a financial burden, and eventually we have no other choice but to go out of business. And we've seen that over the past decade with some of the major commercial beekeepers, and that they just can't afford to keep replacing. And so then they're not meeting pollination needs of crops throughout the nation. And this then becomes an issue for our food supply. So based on the numerous studies that have been conducted over the past decade, we have adjusted the way that we take care of our hives, And primarily that entails the placement of our hives on organically certified and organically run farms and estates, which means we're placing our bees as far away from applied agrochemicals such as like neonicotinoid pesticides or fungicides, and then we also, with how we manage our hives, we do not treat with any chemicals or antibiotics within the hive. We don't feed our bees sugar water, which becomes a nutritional issue as well. So we're making every effort to have healthy bees and protect them from any kind of pesticides that have been proven through various studies to cause colony collapse disorder. The effects that colony collapse disorder could have on our worldwide food supply is potentially devastating. If you stop to consider 1 in every 3 bites of food that we consume is directly reliant on honeybee pollination, that's huge. Agriculturally, the crops would not be sufficiently pollinated, therefore yield would decrease. Environmentally, likewise, pollination would not occur to the level needed to feed our wildlife, and that would be devastating as well. And then, of course, our food supply for our worldwide population would be decreased with the extinction of the honeybee by approximately 1/3. And there's no way we could feed our population with that kind of reduction. I'm involved with various clubs and organizations that help create awareness for the plight of the honeybee and colony collapse disorder. We participate specifically with the Mid-Atlantic Honeybee Consortium and also with various beekeeping associations such as the Eastern Apiculture, various state and county organizations, beekeepers associations as well. And as far as if I think enough is being done to save the honeybees, I certainly think there's a lot of work ahead of us. We're still seeing like considerable losses, and as I've mentioned before, that's unsustainable for the industry. And I feel like lobbying efforts are very important at this point. Our government needs to provide some kind of support to the industry until we can get a handle on how to manage the bees more effectively with exposure to certain pesticides and herbicides if we're not willing to ban them, as the European Union has done. And incidentally, the European Union has several countries in Europe have banned the use of specific neonicotinoid pesticides, and they've seen considerable growth in their honeybee populations. So that's actually very positive news, and I feel like lobbying efforts here in the U.S. would definitely help with moving in that direction, which would benefit us all.
Hello, my name is Chet. I'm a second-generation beekeeper. I've been keeping bees now for about 45 years. I started as a young man. My father introduced me to beekeeping. I was quite reluctant to start out in the beekeeping hobby. But over time and through the literature that my father collected and that I read, I became more interested in the honeybees. And just watching him get his full enjoyment out of taking care of the bees, the hives, understanding what they needed to survive during the spring, how he made sure the woodenware was all cleaned up and ready for winter time, and just the consistency of the bees and how they were, how relatively easy it was to manage the bees once you understood their behavior pattern and had a general understanding of the structure of the colony. It just turned out to be a real great connection between my father and myself, as well as a wonderful connection with the outside world, learning so much about flowers and the bees. I'm now taking care of bees at another level where uh, honey production is the key to our small business, where we sell hive products, candles, skincare products, honey, of course, propolis, and pollen. Whatever we can collect from the hives and share between the bees and our customers. And having a number of hives in different locations, I'm able to retrieve a pretty good nectar flow based on where we put the hives, and getting understanding of the area around, the flora around the area in which the bees are able to collect the nectar to produce honey. So I have a lot of out yards in the region. I'm in the mid-Atlantic region. Maryland is my primary state of where the bees are located, and been doing it, like I said, for about 45 years, and hope to keep on taking care of the honeybees. What does colony collapse disorder mean to me as a beekeeper? Well, colony collapse disorder, and as well as other bee diseases, pests, predators, all of these things that negatively impact the hive, is quite a concern as a beekeeper. But colony collapse disorder especially sends chills through the industry. We're trying to understand